He held a butter knife and whispered a secret no one saw coming. Welcome to Clue Hunt, I'm your host Thornwick. Let's build this mystery together. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your messages truly make this journey special. Let's begin. I've always said that trouble usually knocks with a whisper, not a bang. But that morning it came spooning its way into the dining room like it had a standing invitation. I was halfway through my eggs, soft-boiled, 2 minutes 45, seconds per Fritz's uncompromising clockwork, when the front doorbell rang. Now normally I'd let it ring. Wolfe doesn't like his breakfast interrupted, and neither do I, especially not when Fritz is on a roll with his hollandaise. But this ring was insistent, like the person behind it believed urgency could outstare a lock. I glanced at the kitchen, heard Wolfe's fork click against porcelain in the next room, and sighed. Fritz popped his head out, concern stitched across his brow. Ignore it, I told him. Fritz nodded, but the doorbell didn't. It rang again. And then again. Blast it, came Wolfe's voice, sonorous and perturbed. Archie, if that continues, say it will sour the eggs. That was his version of a military order. I pushed back from the table and headed for the front door, grumbling a little, just loud enough for Wolfe to pretend not to hear. I opened it to find a woman standing there, who looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days and didn't intend to start now. She was trim, mid-40s, expensive coat too warm for the weather, and she clutched her handbag like it had secrets. Her hair was tidy in a way that suggested she controlled it more by will than by product, and she had eyes like a banker, auditing your soul. "Miss Goodwin?" she asked. I gave her the smile I keep on hand for surprise visitors. "Close, I'm Archie Goodwin. You're early for a lunch appointment and late for breakfast. Mind telling me which one you're here for?" "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe," she said, sharp as a dry martini. "It's urgent and personal." "Those are 2 of his least favorite words," I said, "but you're in luck, he's just begun to digest." She stepped in without waiting for an invitation. It was the kind of move that usually got her, a polite redirect back to the sidewalk. But something in the way she moved told me Wolfe would want to hear this one. Maybe it was the desperation leaking through her composure, or maybe it was the envelope I caught a glimpse of in her handbag. Thick, cream paper worn at the corners, like it had been handled 100 times. I led her to the office. Wolfe was already back in his chair, a finger pressed to his temple like he was coaxing a migraine to finish its business quickly. "This," I said, "is a lady with a handbag full of anxiety and a voice that could slice prosciutto. She says, 'It's urgent and personal, fooey,'" Wolfe muttered. But his eyes opened, fixed on her, and he gestured without looking toward the red chair. She sat like someone accustomed to being obeyed but not believed. "I'm Miranda Dalrymple," she said. "You may have heard of my father, Langston Dalrymple." I had. Industrialist, collector of art and enemies, known for keeping a circle of admirers and a shorter list of estranged family. Died 3 weeks ago of a heart attack, sudden, unsuspicious, and wealthy. It had made a brief stir in the obits. I remembered it mostly because the write-up had been unusually discreet about the will. Wolfe made no acknowledgement, which was his way of telling her to go on, if she must. "I'm here," she said, "because someone left something in my father's. Safe? Not part of the estate, not something he told anyone about. It was addressed to me. It was a butter knife." Even I blinked at that one. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "A butter knife?" "Yes, a cheap one, stainless steel, hotel pattern, with a note. 3 words, handwritten. You know why?" Wolfe frowned, not out of confusion, but calculation. "And you don't?" "I don't," she said quickly. "But my brother does, or he thinks he does. He's accusing me of manipulating our father, of changing his will. He says the knife proves something." "What?" she swallowed. "He says it proves I was there the night father died." "But weren't you?" I asked. "No," she said. I was in Montreal, my passport proves it, but Daniel doesn't believe me. He says the knife is a code or a confession or blackmail. And he's threatening to go public, Wolfe. Drummed his fingers. Once, twice, then stopped. Mr. Goodwin, he said without looking at me, you will take down the particulars. I looked at him. He hadn't asked about money. He hadn't asked why she hadn't gone to the police or to a lawyer. He hadn't even asked if the butter knife had fingerprints, but he was interested, which meant something here smelled, and it wasn't Fritz's eggs. As I pulled out my notebook, Miranda Dalrymple finally opened her handbag and set the knife in its padded envelope on Wolfe's desk, and I swear to you the man flinched. Not like it frightened him, like it offended him. Whatever game had just started, it had landed in the one place Wolfe considered sacred, his peace, and someone, somewhere, had just buttered the wrong toast. I jotted down the details, while Miranda Dalrymple sat stiff-backed in Wolfe's red chair like she was balancing on principle. She was doing her best to keep her tone level, but her grip on the armrest betrayed the truth. She was cornered, not by a threat, not yet, but by the possibility of one. Whatever message that cheap butter knife carried, she hadn't deciphered it, and that scared her more than if she had. Wolfe stared at the envelope without touching it. He rarely handled evidence directly unless it offended him intellectually, and I could tell this one did. Not because it was a weapon, there wasn't a sharp edge on it, but because it had made its way into his house, invited by a riddle. He hated riddles. They disrupted his categories. Miss Dalrymple, he said, and the words came slow and full of weight. Why not take this to the police? My father's estate is volatile. There are business holdings, multiple trusts, art investments. If this becomes public, if Daniel accuses me in court, it could tank the estate. I'd be litigating scandal before probate. I need this resolved quietly. Then you suspect someone? I suspect Daniel, or someone who wants to manipulate. Him, he's impulsive, easily provoked. That implies motive, not method. You said the knife was found in your father's safe. Yes, a private one in his study. I opened it myself 3 days ago, with the executor and our attorney present. It wasn't listed in the inventory. Was it locked? Yes. Could your brother have planted it? She hesitated. Theoretically, but the lawyer was there when we opened it. The safe hadn't been tampered with, I cleared my throat, so someone with prior access put a knife and a 3-word note into your father's private safe, and timed it so it'd make you look guilty after his death. Yes, she said, almost whispering. Pretty dramatic for a butter knife, I said. Unless your father was stabbed with it. Wolfe shot me a glare, and I shrugged. There was no crime, she said. He collapsed at the club. They said it was clean. No autopsy. Wolfe shut his eyes. That meant he was thinking. I watched. Miranda. She was calculating something. Probably how much she'd said and how much she hadn't. I've seen enough lies to know when someone's not telling the whole story, but I didn't peg her for a liar. Just someone watching the trapdoor under her feet. I'll need a list, Wolfe said, eyes still closed. People with access to the study in the months before his death. Also, all beneficiaries of the estate, and the attorney's name. Brought it. She reached into her bag again, producing a folder with a familiar crispness that said corporate precision. Names, contact numbers, timelines. I took it from her and flipped it open. 4 names stood out immediately. Daniel Dalrymple, younger brother, and disgruntled heir. Elena Priest, long-time personal assistant to the deceased. Calvin Mercer, business partner and executor. And Henry Brodick, a cousin from the mother's side, also listed as a minor heir. I passed it to Wolfe, who didn't touch it. Mr. Goodwin will conduct inquiries, he said. You will make yourself available for questions. You will not, under any circumstances, confront your brother or reveal your visit here. She nodded. Understood. "And the knife stays here," Wolfe added. "Fritz!" Fritz entered, silent as ever, took the envelope and left with it like he was carrying nitroglycerin. I saw Miranda out. Her heels clicked across the floor like a countdown. As I opened the door, she paused. "He used to say," she murmured, "that the ugliest things were often the most deliberate. Your father—" She nodded. "That butter knife, it's not just ugly, it's chosen." Then she left, leaving behind a faint trace of something expensive and anxious. When I got back to the office, Wolfe had swiveled half an inch in his chair. His version of bracing for disruption. He opened his eyes. "Calvin Mercer," he said. "Executor," I confirmed. "Business partner for 20 years, listed as co-trustee." Wolfe grunted. "Mr. Mercer will come here. Arrange it." I picked up the phone. Mercer's secretary was the sharp type who could probably catalogue an inbox by smell. She agreed to send him over at noon. That gave me an hour, which I spent upstairs reading over Miranda's notes while Wolfe brooded and the butter knife sat, quietly offending the laws of breakfast. Calvin Mercer arrived on the dot. Tall, rail-thin, with a tailored suit and a handshake like a diplomatic treaty. He looked like someone who negotiated with lawyers in his sleep. But there was something guarded in his manner, a little too smooth for a man just here to wrap up. "A clean estate." He didn't sit until Wolfe gestured. Then he crossed one leg neatly and rested his briefcase on the floor with reverence. "I'll be brief," Wolfe said. "Miss Dalrymple has brought a matter to my attention that touches on your role as executor." I assumed she might. His voice was low, textured, like varnish over wood. "She's unsettled. Daniel is unpredictable." "You've spoken with him?" 3 days ago. He called, raving about a note. Something about a butter knife. I assumed it was grief." Wolfe raised a brow. "You didn't ask what he meant?" I tried. He hung up after accusing his sister of conspiring to steal the estate. I haven't heard from him since. "Did you see the knife?" "No." I watched Mercer's face as he said it. No flicker, no shift. Either he was clean or he'd rehearsed. "Mr. Mercer," Wolfe said, "your access to Mr. Dalrymple's affairs was extensive?" "Yes, we co-managed several investment portfolios. I was aware of most personal details." "Was your client sentimental? Only about numbers? Would he have left a symbolic message?" Mercer considered. "He did nothing without intent. But no, he didn't play games. Not that I ever saw." Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "Then someone who knew him intimately, a daughter, a brother, a confidant, might interpret a knife and a note as deliberate." "Possibly. And..." As the doorbell rang, a triple jab like someone trying to poke a hole in the building. I rose annoyed. Wolfe stayed silent, watching the door like it owed him an explanation. When I opened it, I was met with a flash of red, hair, coat and cheeks, and the sound of someone not asking permission. "I want to see him," the man barked, stepping. "Chelsea, where is he?" Behind him, a cab idled. "Daniel Dalrymple," he announced, pushing past me and straight toward Wolfe's office. "You're Nero Wolfe, good. I want you to hear this before my sister poisons the air." "Mr. Dalrymple," I started, but Wolfe lifted a hand. His mouth tightened, not from surprise, but from irritation. Daniel was younger than Miranda, wiry and overdressed, with a gleam in his eyes that was part fury, part theatre. He dropped into the yellow chair like it was a throne, pulled a folded sheet of paper from his coat and slammed it on Wolfe's desk. "That knife proves she was there. The night my father died. He left that note to warn me. You know why he meant the way she tricked him." Wolfe didn't move. "Mr. Dalrymple, you have without invitation entered my home. You are shouting. You are waving paper. Cease." Daniel stopped, blinking. Wolfe's voice could turn lava into marble when he wanted. "You have accused your sister of a crime. Do you have evidence?" He pointed at the paper. "Read it." I picked it up. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten. shaky script. You know. Why, look in the butter dish, no date, no signature. Found this in my father's nightstand, slipped into his journal. She planted it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Why? Because she was cut out of the art trust, and then she was back in. He changed the terms 2 weeks before he died. I think she pressured him. You think? I know she did. Wolfe closed his eyes. I do not traffic in feuds, he said calmly. Mr. Goodwin will verify the note. You will leave the original. With me? You will not contact your sister. If you do, I will decline further engagement. Daniel hesitated, then shoved the paper toward me, stood and marched out. The office went still. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me. The knife was never the point. No, it was bait. For whom, we now know. Mr. Panzer, if you please. Which meant the real hunt had just begun. I phoned Saul Panzer at precisely 3:06 that afternoon, using the line Wolfe reserved for affairs requiring both discretion and subtlety. Saul didn't ask questions, just murmured, "When and where?" the way a doctor might before heading into surgery. I gave him the short version: estate, safe, knife, note, suspects, and told him we needed eyes on Daniel Dalrymple for at least the next 48 hours. Saul grunted his approval and hung up. Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair. The butter knife, our Exhibit A in what was rapidly becoming a game of familial psychological warfare, still rested in its padded envelope atop his desk. He hadn't opened it. He wouldn't. He expected me to handle the tangible world. His job was purely cerebral. I leaned against the doorway. What exactly are we hoping Saul finds? Wolfe opened his eyes. What Daniel does when no one is listening. He is volatile. I want to know how much is theater and how much is rehearsal. I nodded. And Miranda? She's more careful. Her errors will be omissions. You will see Miss Priest this evening, the assistant. Eleanor Priest. I flipped open the notes. 52, worked for Langston Dalrymple since 2009. Oversaw his correspondence, finances and travel. No record. Served prior employment in the file. Lives on the Upper West Side. Unmarried. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. Miss Priest is the type of person who sees too much and says too little. She won't volunteer. You'll have to notice what she withholds. That I could handle. Fritz packed me a sandwich and a thermos of coffee with the care of a man loading. Sacred artifacts. I left the brownstone at 4:30 and caught a cab to West 84th Street. Elena Priest's building was the sort of pre-war construction that gets praised in real estate listings for charm and character, which usually means the pipes groan and the walls remember every argument. She answered after 2 knocks. Trim, greying and alert behind steel-rimmed glasses, Elena Priest had the unshakable bearing of a woman who spent years organizing powerful men and filing away their moods by date and relevance. She wore a dark blue blouse, no jewelry, and eyes. That flicked over me like a ledger. I'm Archie Goodwin, I said, holding up my credentials. Working with Mr. Wolfe, may I come in? She hesitated. Then, Langston didn't believe in hiring detectives. Wolfe's not a detective, I said. He's a sedentary volcano with a library card. That got the corner of her mouth to twitch. Barely. She led me inside. The apartment was as neat as her appearance, nothing decorative, nothing wasted. Shelves lined with biographies, a modest kitchen, one window cracked open to let in the dying light of the afternoon. I already spoke with Mr. Mercer, she said. And Miranda. I told them everything I know. That's what worries me, I said. Nobody knows everything, but you might have seen something that didn't make sense at the time. She didn't sit, so I didn't either. Did Mr. Dalrymple ever mention a butter knife? I asked. No. Did he ever reference a message or a warning left behind for his children? No. Her voice didn't waver. She was either telling the truth or had practiced to the point where even her conscience had clocked out. I tried another route. You had access to the study? Yes. The safe? No. Ever see anyone else who did? Only Langston and Mr. Mercer. She didn't flinch when she said it, but she blinked. Once. That was enough. Eleanor, I said, softening the angle, Langston trusted you. He may have told you something unusual, something that didn't make sense until now. She folded her arms. Langston kept secrets. From everyone. Even from himself, I sometimes thought. But the week before he died, something did change. I waited. He called me on a Sunday morning, asked me to find the number for a locksmith, not one of our regular vendors, a discreet one, to change the safe, I asked. He said it was for the wine cellar. Did he have a wine cellar? No, I raised my eyebrows. He was lying, she admitted. But I didn't press him. You didn't do that with Langston. You just logged the lie and moved on. Do you remember the name of the locksmith? She hesitated, then reached for a notepad beside the phone, flipped it open to a page that had been folded down. This one, she said, tapping a number. Lower East Side. He never told me if they came. I copied it down. Did anyone visit him unexpectedly that week? She hesitated again. Daniel showed up. Late one night. I was working late on the quarterly disbursements. I heard them arguing through the study door. I don't know, the door was closed, but Langston was furious. He shouted something. You had your chance. Don't rewrite history now. Then silence. That tracked with Daniel's current mood. Did Miranda visit that week? No, she was in Canada. She sent him a package, books. He didn't open them. I thanked her, gave her Wolfe's card, and told her not to talk to anyone else about the matter without clearing it. She didn't nod, but I knew she'd comply. The locksmith was a harder nut. He was closed by the time I called, so I made a note to follow up the next morning. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was dark and Wolfe was in the dining room working his way through Cornish game hen and a scowl. I waited until he was settled with a glass of beer before I gave my report. He listened in silence, sipping slowly, until I mentioned the wine cellar. Pfui, he muttered. An amateur's lie, so. A locksmith, a knife in a safe, a planted note, and a sibling rivalry fueled by inheritance. Someone went to great lengths to misdirect. Miranda says she was in Montreal. Elena backs it. Daniel was in the house. That puts him closest to the safe. But, Wolfe said, tapping a finger on his glass, not necessarily closest to the idea. I frowned. You think someone else planted the knife for Daniel to find? Wolfe closed his eyes. No. I think someone wanted him to explode. And someone else wanted her to watch it happen. That didn't make me feel better, Mr. Panzer. I updated him. Saul had reported that Daniel had met with someone in a downtown bar. A woman, mid-30s, sharp-dressed, not family. He didn't get a photo, but noted the time and place. Wolfe instructed him to identify her discreetly. At 9:45 the phone rang. I answered. A quiet voice on the other end introduced himself as Lawrence Kinlan, Langston Dalrymple's personal accountant. I shouldn't be calling, he said. But I saw Miranda today. She looked afraid. And 2 weeks before Mr. Dalrymple died, he instructed me to open a sub-account, a discretionary trust, for someone named E.P., no further details. It was unusual. I asked him if this was an inheritance matter. He said no. He said it was protection. Protection from what? He didn't say, just looked at me like I should already know. E.P., I said. Elena Priest? The line went silent. Then, I didn't say that. He hung up. I relayed this to Wolfe. He took a breath through his nose like he was inhaling a particularly rancid flower. Someone is rewriting memory, he said, and I intend to put an end to it. He gestured at the envelope still sitting on the desk. Archie. Tomorrow you will find the locksmith. Tonight you will confirm Miss Dalrymple's travel dates. I nodded. As I left the office, Wolfe called after me. One more thing. Yes? Add a jar of mustard to the grocery. Order. I find I have lost my taste for butter. The next morning, after a breakfast that Fritz insisted be enjoyed without the intrusion of knives, his way of participating in the investigation, I stepped out into the misty hush of West 35th Street and hailed a cab to the Lower East Side. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, which meant I had exactly 2 hours before he expected a preliminary report, preferably one with names, dates, and a confession in neat cursive. The locksmith shop was tucked between a closed deli and a storefront. Church that advertised faith healing and discount dentures. J. Pinter and Sons, discreet security since 1932, was painted in fading gold script across the door, which didn't look like it had been updated since Roosevelt. Inside, the air smelled like metal filings and old stories. A man in a denim apron with a nest of white hair looked up from a vice, squinting at me. "You Pinter?" I asked. "One of them," he said. "The last, actually." I introduced myself and handed over Wolfe's card. He looked at it, then at me, then back at the card like it had personally offended him. "Wolfe don't usually deal with locks." "True," I said, "but one of your recent clients may have dealt with a dead man." That got his attention. I explained the situation. Langston Dalrymple, prominent client, died suddenly, and sometime in the weeks before his death, someone from this shop changed the combination to his private safe. Pinter nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember. It wasn't him who called. It was his assistant, Priest. Eleanor," he nodded, "said she was calling on his behalf. Private job, quiet. We don't advertise, you know, all word of mouth. She said the safe was personal, not commercial, and needed a reset, not a replacement. You—" "Go yourself." "My nephew, Owen. Young but sharp. You want to talk to him, he's out back." I found Owen behind the building, sharpening drill bits. Built like a fire hydrant and equally talkative, he confirmed the job. "Real nice study," he said. "Wood panels, old books, safe behind a painting. Pretty standard setup. Who let you in?" "Miss Priest. She said Mr. Dalrymple wasn't feeling well. Stayed upstairs the whole time. She gave me the new combo." "New combo. Yep." Written on a sticky note. I sealed the envelope and tested it after. Worked clean. "You see what was inside the safe?" "Didn't look, not my business. That was consistent, but it shifted the whole time frame. If Elena Priest had the combination changed and supplied the new code herself, she'd had access. Whether she used it was another matter." I thanked them both, jotted everything down, and headed back uptown with my next stop planned. By noon, I was in the quiet lobby of a downtown hotel that liked its carpets deep and its clientele deeper-pocketed. I asked the concierge about Miranda. Dalrymple's stay in Montreal. He confirmed she had checked in there for 3 nights the week of her father's death, complete with time-stamped receipts and restaurant charges. She had an alibi. A good one. But that didn't mean she hadn't planned something before boarding the plane. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair with a glass of beer and a sour expression, which he reserved for uncooperative evidence, and particularly bad music from the upstairs neighbors. "Well," he asked. Elena Priest changed the safe's combo, personally arranged it, supplied the new code and supervised the installation. Miranda was in Montreal, confirmed by the hotel. Daniel's still under Saul's watch. No sudden movements, though he met again with the mystery woman last night. "Same bar, different dress," Wolfe nodded once. "So Miss Dalrymple did not plant the knife. She was absent, but she received it." "Which leaves us with a question," I said. "Why did Elena Priest choose a combination if she wasn't the one using it later, or was she?" Wolfe didn't answer. He turned in his chair and picked up the envelope for the first time. His thick fingers peeled it open. He extracted the butter knife with the care of a museum curator and held it up to the light. It was plain. Hotel cutlery, as unremarkable as a bus schedule. But Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "There is wear," he said. "Unnatural, the edge has been filed lightly. Why?" "To make it sharp. No, Wolfe said. Not sharp enough to harm, but enough to signal intention. Someone wanted it to look like a weapon or an attempt. Scare tactic, or accusation. Let us suppose Elena intended to warn Miranda, or frame her. The change of combination gave her access. She placed the knife and the note. But why confess that way? Not a confession, Wolfe said, a question. You know why implies shared history, something between them. But Miranda says she doesn't know what it means. Which may be true, or may be the one lie she's chosen to tell. At that moment, Fritz appeared at the door with a note. A call for you, Archie. A Miss Elena Priest. I went to the phone. Her voice was steady, but the kind of steady that sits on a wobble. Thouses, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Tell me. Not on the phone. Can we meet? Where? Langston's house. I kept a set of keys. Tonight, 7:30. I'll be there. When I returned, Wolfe was already gazing toward the ceiling like he expected it to answer him. She's about to break, I said. Good, Wolfe muttered. She has been creaking for too long. That night I arrived at the Dalrymple townhouse just before 7:30. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock. The place was dark except for a desk lamp in the study. She didn't sit. I shouldn't. Be here, she said, but you need to know something. Go ahead. I lied about not seeing the contents of the safe. I saw them, not all, but enough. There was an envelope, handwritten, addressed to Miranda. I opened it. What was inside? A letter, 1 page. It said, I've done what you asked. You'll find it in the study. That's all. I frowned. Langston's handwriting? No. Typed, unsigned. But I think Daniel forged it to scare her. I stared at her. Wait. You think Daniel planted the note and the knife? I think he knew the safe had been changed. Maybe he got the new combo somehow, or guessed. He was always nosy. He wanted Miranda out of the way, maybe even me. That's a lot of maybe. She looked away. I'm telling you because something else happened. What? Last night someone came to my apartment, left a butter knife outside my door, wrapped in paper. My blood cooled. Did you bring it? She nodded, crossed to her handbag, and took it out. This one was cleaner, untouched, no message. Same model, I said. Where's the paper? She hesitated. I burned it. I stared at her. Why? It said, you know what you did. She looked shaken now, the calm cracking. You didn't tell the police? No. If I do, Daniel will accuse me of playing games. He's waiting for that. I stepped back, thinking fast. This wasn't just about inheritance. Someone was escalating. First a planted note, then a second knife. Not to kill, but to push, to break someone. I left Elena with a warning to lock her doors and made my way back to the brownstone through a misting rain. Wolfe was still in his chair. She cracked, I said. But it wasn't a confession. It was a warning. He nodded slowly. Someone is using guilt as a weapon, he said, and they've just run out of butter knives. I slept light that night. When someone starts mailing utensils like threats, you don't relax into the pillow. You listen for creaks, for footsteps, for the sound of steel scraping across porcelain in the back of your head. And while I wasn't expecting anyone to drop a soup spoon on our stoop, I had the uneasy feeling someone was just getting started at a breakfast. Fritz served a silent omelette and declined to make eye contact with the butter dish. Wolfe was, if anything, more irritable than usual. He drummed his fingers against the edge of his chair during the entire meal. Not rhythmically. More like each tap was part of an equation he hadn't solved yet. After the dishes were cleared, I joined him in the office. The butter knife still sat on his desk, now joined by the second one Elena had handed over, wrapped neatly in tissue. They were nearly identical, both cheap and meaningless, unless you knew what they meant, which as of yet we didn't. Archie, he said, not looking up from the envelope, there is a missing piece. I waited. If someone wanted Miranda, frightened, there were simpler ways. She is intelligent, yes, but emotionally guarded, not prone to panic. So the knives aren't to scare her, I asked. Then what? Push her into action. Precisely. Someone wants her to react. To what? That, Wolfe said, is what we must find out before she does. At 10:02, Saul called. I patched him into the office and Wolfe spoke. On speakerphone, a concession he allowed only for Saul and canned fruit distributors. I followed Daniel to that bar again last night, Saul said. Same woman showed. Short dark hair, beige coat, took a cab from Gramercy. They talked about a key. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. A key, he repeated. What kind? Didn't say. But he gave her a small envelope. She opened it, checked the contents, and nodded. Then she said something like, that should do it finally. Do you have her name? Not yet. I tailed the cab back to her building. She lives in a brownstone on West 88th. I'll get more today. Wolfe thanked him and hung up. A key, I repeated. To what? That, Wolfe said. We must determine before it opens something we cannot close. Before I could ask what exactly that meant, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered. A moment later he appeared, pale. A visitor, he said, rather insistent. It was Henry Brodick, the cousin, and he looked as if he'd seen something that didn't want to be seen. Thin, tweedy, with a moustache that suggested bad decisions. In barbershop chairs, he entered the office with the energy of a man fleeing the scene of a thought. I wasn't going to come, he said, without waiting to be asked. I thought it was family business, and I stay out of those. I leaned against the bookshelf. We'd noticed. But something's wrong, Brodick went on. I got a call this morning. No voice, just silverware. Clinking. Wolfe raised his brows. Clinking? Cutlery, I think. And then a scraping sound. That's not a threat, I said. That's a performance piece. Brodick pulled a note from his coat pocket, and this was slid under my door, no envelope. It was folded once, with a typed message. The knife remembers. So do you. Wolfe didn't speak. He simply extended a hand, and Brodick dropped the note into it like it might bite. No signature, I said, no fingerprints probably, but now all three beneficiaries have received something. Miranda got the knife in the safe, Eleanor the doorstep blade, and now this, which suggests a fourth hand, Wolfe said. A composer, someone orchestrating, and using guilt as the melody. Brodick's lips thinned. I never... He stopped. Wolfe's gaze hardened. Mr. Brodick, if you wish to relieve your conscience, I am not a priest. But if someone is attempting to unearth the past, I must be informed of its contents. I don't know anything about a knife, Brodick said, but I do know that 20 years ago Langston Dalrymple paid off someone to leave the country. A girl. Pregnant. That did it. Wolfe opened his eyes. Go on. Her name was Nina Thorne. She was a graduate assistant at his alma mater, worked on a philanthropy report. They had an affair. Miranda found out. It was covered up. And? She never came back. No one heard of her again. But I always wondered. You think Daniel knew? Langston never acknowledged the child, but maybe Daniel found something. Letters, maybe. Enough to feel cheated? Wolfe asked. To believe Miranda benefited while another heir was erased? Brodick swallowed. It would explain his paranoia. Wolfe waved a hand. Brodick left, visibly relieved. We sat in silence for a moment. Langston had a secret child, I said. One Miranda covered up? Or protected, Wolfe said. That is yet to be seen, but it explains the inheritance tension. If Daniel believes there is a lost sibling, he may view Miranda's control as theft. Then who's the composer? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the two butter knives. Someone who knows the story, who wants it forced into the open, not for justice but for rupture. The phone rang again. I answered. It was Saul. Got a name? The woman meeting Daniel, Nina Thorne, changed her name when she returned to the States 5 years ago. She lives under her maiden name again. And she's not alone. I froze. She has a child, daughter, 21, lives with her, goes by Evelyn Priest. I felt the air shift. Eleanor? No relation, just coincidence. But I pulled some college records. Langston made a tuition payment last year, untraceable unless you knew where to look. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. Evelyn Priest, EP, the trust. He nodded. The real heir. And Nina's back. Meeting Daniel. Which means they're trying to, reclaim the estate? Or destroy it, Wolfe said. I stared at the knives, at the notes, at the pattern. Daniel's been manipulated. Yes, Wolfe said, but not by Miranda, by the girl he didn't know was his sister. He rose, a rare thing, and walked slowly to the globe in the corner, tapped it. Call them all, he said. Miranda, Daniel, Elena, Broddick, Mercer. We end this tonight. Everyone in the office? Yes, this, he said, tapping the globe again, is no longer a matter of knives. It is about memory, and what happens when you sharpen it too far. That night they came, tense, quiet, jittery, and Wolfe waited in his chair, eyes half-lidded, as the truth gathered at his door. Tomorrow he would begin. Tonight he let silence sharpen the blade. By 7:30 that evening, Wolfe's office looked like a high-stakes séance for the living. 6 people seated in measured discomfort, waiting for a ghost to speak. Each one carried something invisible, fear, anger, calculation, and each tried to pretend they weren't watching everyone else with the suspicion usually reserved for border guards. Wolfe sat behind his desk, larger than life, and twice as immovable. He hadn't yet spoken, but his gaze had passed over each guest, as if measuring their moral weight against the room's oxygen supply. To my right, Miranda Dalrymple sat poised, chin high, but her left thumb rubbed the inside of her glove like she was polishing a memory. Next to her, Daniel twitched one leg, his fingers tapping his knee like a Morse code message no one wanted to decode. Elena Priest sat across from him, shoulders tight, looking at the fireplace more than anyone else. Henry Broddick had taken refuge, in false dignity, hands folded neatly over his lap, the last gasp of a man hoping good posture would keep him from implication. Calvin Mercer, the executor, was there too, calm, unreadable, like a man who's learned the value of silence from too many depositions. I stood behind Wolfe's chair, notebook in hand, watching everything and writing down what mattered. Wolfe didn't like repetition, and he never explained himself twice. This was a one-shot affair. He spoke at last, voice smooth, indifferent as rain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I will make no appeals to emotion. I do not care who loved whom, who disappointed whom, or which long-dead decisions have poisoned the present. My concern is a campaign of manipulation that has invaded my home and insulted my peace. I have traced its shape. I will now share it." Nobody moved. Wolfe gestured to the 2 knives on his desk, now laid side by side on a linen cloth like relics. These objects are not weapons. They are signals, left deliberately. One in a safe, one on a doorstep. A third message sent to Mr. Broddick. All anonymous, all invoking memory, none claiming responsibility. Such things are not spontaneous. He turned his gaze on Daniel. "Mr. Dalrymple, you were misled." Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but Wolfe raised a finger. "You believed your sister manipulated your father, that she induced him to alter his will, that a cryptic knife was a deathbed confession implicating her. You were encouraged in this belief by someone with knowledge of your father's past and of your disposition." Daniel flushed. "And you know who that someone is?" "Yes, but first I must remind you, a butter knife is not evidence. A note reading, You know why is not a confession. It is a prompt. Its purpose is not to inform, but to provoke. He let that sit. I have learned that 20 years ago your father had an affair. The woman became pregnant. She was paid to leave the country. That child was never acknowledged, but she returned. A ripple moved through the room like a tremor under glass. Miranda stiffened. What are you saying? That the knives were not about guilt, Wolfe said. They were about identity, about history, rewritten not by power, but by blood. He nodded at me. I stepped forward and dropped the final item. On the desk, a photograph printed from Saul's surveillance shots. It showed Daniel in a downtown bar, handing an envelope to a dark-haired woman. Wolfe pointed at it. Her name is Nina Thorne. She changed it after she returned to the States. Her daughter's name is Evelyn Priest, Elena gasped. No relation? Wolfe asked mildly. No, she said, eyes wide. I didn't know. She is the girl your employer left behind, Wolfe said. She has come of age. She discovered the past, and she has reached out to the brother she never knew she had. Daniel's lips parted. She told me. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. What? Daniel looked at Miranda. She said our father was a coward, that he erased her, that you helped. Miranda's face turned pale. That's a lie. She showed me letters, Daniel said, but softer now. Typed. She said you knew. I didn't, Miranda said, standing. I didn't know she existed. I knew father had secrets, but not this, not her. But the trust, I said. The one in Evelyn's name. E.P. Wolfe turned toward Eleanor now. You opened it. Under instruction. Eleanor nodded slow. Langston told me it was for protection. He didn't explain. He regretted it, Miranda whispered. He must have. Yes, Wolfe agreed, and perhaps he meant to reconcile, but he died before he could. So someone else decided to tell the story, not openly, through symbols, through echoes. He gestured again at the knives. Evelyn Priest, encouraged by her mother, began a campaign. She planted the knife in the safe. She typed the note. She slipped one under Eleanor's door. She left a third for Mr. Brodick, not to accuse but to destabilize, to bring attention to what had been buried. Why now? Mercer asked, his voice breaking the long silence. Because, Wolfe said, a will was filed, one that did not name her. She discovered the trust was minimal. She learned about the change in Miranda's share. She assumed the worst, and she turned Daniel into her instrument. Daniel's voice was ragged now. She told me she wanted the truth, that's all. She wanted pain, Wolfe said. She got it. The room was silent. Then Miranda stepped forward, her voice trembling. Where is she now? Wolfe looked at me. I nodded. She's in the city, I said. Still with Nina. We can arrange a meeting. Miranda looked at Wolfe. Would you? I do not arrange reconciliation, Wolfe said. Only revelations. Miranda turned to Daniel. We have to meet her, both of us. Daniel didn't speak. He only nodded. Wolfe let out a breath and reached for his beer. There will be no legal consequences, he said, but there will be moral ones, which in my experience are more persistent. No one argued. One by one they filed out, quiet, thoughtful, altered. When the door closed behind the last of them, Wolfe slumped a fraction in his chair. Well, he said, that was offensive, I grinned. Too much family? Too much symbolism, he muttered. Cutlery should serve food, not function as epistolary devices. Still, I said, you cracked it. Of course, he said. Now please, Archie, inform Fritz I will require a roast duck, with no carving tools on the table. And the knives? Return them, he said. To the kitchen, but separate drawers. I prefer not to encourage reunions. I nodded and went to tell Fritz. Behind me, Wolfe closed his eyes and whispered something only the orchids would hear. something about inheritance and appetite, and how both, left unchecked, tend to turn bitter at the edges. The following morning, the brownstone settled into something approximating its natural state, quiet, book-lined, and filled with the slow, aromatic conquest of Fritz's cinnamon scones. I found Wolfe in his chair at 9 o'clock sharp, sipping beer and scanning the New York Times with the practiced boredom of a man who already knew how the headlines ended. He barely glanced up as I entered. "You'll be glad to know," I said, "no new knives arrived overnight." "A low bar for contentment," he muttered. "Miranda and Daniel are meeting Evelyn this afternoon. Neutral ground. Saul's making. Sure nobody runs? Foy. Saul will babysit, but he cannot mend the wound." "No," I agreed. "But he can make sure nobody reopens it with a salad fork." Wolfe shot me a look, the kind that says I was in danger of being asked to summarize Proust as punishment. But the truth was, even he felt it. The aftermath was here. The mystery, in its most mechanical sense, was solved. We had identified the sender of the butter-knife notes, the motivations behind the cryptic threats, and the long-suppressed scandal that had fueled the chaos. Evelyn Priest, Langston Dalrymple's unacknowledged daughter, had used symbols, suggestion, and a smattering of family psychology to stir the estate into a storm. What remained now was not solving, but settling. Only Wolfe had no intention of allowing that to happen without a final examination. "Call Miss Dalrymple," he said, folding the newspaper. "Request that she return this evening. Alone." I raised an eyebrow. "Miranda?" "Yes. Why?" "Because her behavior has been consistently correct," Wolfe said, "which is suspicious." "I thought you liked correct behavior." "I do," he said, "but only from those with no reason to fake it." Miranda arrived at 6:15, punctual as always, dressed in a dove-grey coat and gloves that didn't match, an omission so unusual for her I noted it before she even sat. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes moved like someone scanning. 4 traps. Wolfe didn't offer tea or pleasantries. He simply gestured to the red chair and began. "You were never surprised," he said. Miranda blinked. "Excuse me." "When I told you about Evelyn, about your father's past, you looked stunned, but you weren't shocked." "There is a difference," she said nothing. "You said you didn't know, but you didn't ask anything, Miss Dalrymple. No details, no questions, just acceptance." Still nothing. Wolfe leaned forward, a rare thing. "So I ask again, when did you find out?" A long pause. Then Miranda exhaled and removed her gloves, one finger at a time. 3 years ago," she said quietly. "I was reviewing trust distributions and found an offshore payment. Small, regular, hidden. I traced it. Nina Thorne. I remembered the name." Wolfe said nothing. "I confronted my father," she continued. "He admitted it. He said it was handled long ago. I told him it wasn't, that a person doesn't vanish because you stop remembering them. He called me dramatic. We didn't speak for a week." "So you knew," Wolfe said, "about Evelyn." "I knew she existed," Miranda said. "But I never tried to contact her. I told myself it wasn't my place and maybe I didn't want to reopen the past. But when Father died and Daniel started unraveling, I knew the time was coming. And yet," Wolfe said, "you said nothing." "I was waiting." "For what?" "For her to come to us. I studied her. She wasn't proud, just tired. She wanted to be seen," Miranda said. "That's why she left those knives, not because she hated us, but because she belonged, and no one ever said it." Wolfe nodded. "And now we're meeting, all of us. Today was just the start. Daniel's still furious, but I'll speak with Evelyn again tomorrow, and again after that if I must." She paused. "And the inheritance will change." Wolfe blinked. "You'll contest the will?" "No. I'll amend my own. I can't undo the past, but I can correct the future. Wolfe steepled his fingers. That is commendable. It's necessary, she said. The world doesn't fall apart from scandal, Mr. Wolfe. It falls apart when people pretend scandal never happened. He allowed himself the briefest smile. I'm not virtuous, she added. I've made mistakes. I believed ignoring the past was the same as transcending it. But Evelyn didn't want revenge. She wanted recognition and family. She rose. If I'd known your methods included forced confessions, she said wryly, I'd have sent a sharper knife. I walked her to the door. As she left, I realized something unusual. Miranda Dalrymple, for all her elegance and power, had carried the guilt of another person's choice longer than anyone should. Wolfe called after me once I returned. Do. You see it now? What? She was the only one who changed. Evelyn? No. Miranda. She adapted. She recognized a new truth and altered her course. The others? They reacted. But Miranda evolved. Poetic, I said. And what about you? Wolfe lifted his glass of beer. I am unchanged, as always, but occasionally. I allowed dinner to arrive warm. We didn't speak again until dessert. Fritz brought in a warm pear tart with clove syrup, and Wolfe consumed it with the satisfaction of a man who had finally restored order to a house divided. The knives had been returned to the kitchen drawers, the notes locked in Wolfe's case files, and the Dalrymples, old and new, were inching toward something that could be called healing. Wolfe placed his fork down and spoke as if concluding, a seminar no one else had attended. This was never about inheritance, Archie, or even identity. It was about narrative. How so? He sipped his beer. Langston Dalrymple wrote his family's story, then edited it, then tried to bury the red ink. But someone always comes along to read the footnotes. I nodded slowly. And Evelyn? She reminded them they weren't the only characters. That silence is not deletion. I closed my notebook. And the knives? Wolfe grimaced. Heavy-handed, but effective. Symbolism may be vulgar, but it works. He rose then, slowly, heavily, and left the office. In the quiet that followed, I looked at his chair, still warm, still framed by books and orchids and the scent of distant pears. Then I picked up my pen and wrote the closing line in my notebook. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives with a butter knife and a daughter no one wanted to claim until she made herself impossible to ignore. The next morning brought sun through the brownstones' windows like a surprise guest at a closed party, uninvited but difficult to ignore. I was already at my desk, going over some of the messier strands of the case, trying to decide whether Wolfe's version of justice had stuck its landing or just managed a careful sidestep. Fritz came and went with coffee and a half-smile. Wolfe had been up since dawn, rare and often foreboding. By 9:15, Wolfe summoned me into the office with a grunt that managed to convey both fatigue and victory. He sat behind his desk, freshly shaved and combed, which meant something final was coming. The ceremonial version of the end, not the technical one. Archie, he said, without lifting his eyes from the Morning Post, we have reached the perimeter of this sordid affair, the boundary between what was necessary and what was merely regrettable. I took my usual seat across from him and waited. He set down the paper, adjusted his vest, and gave me that look. The one that said this wasn't about facts anymore, but consequences. Have you read the letter? Eleanor's? He nodded. The envelope had arrived by courier that morning. No stamp, no return address, just my name, and inside, 2 pages of clean, efficient confession. Eleanor Priest, faithful assistant, reluctant participant, had chosen at last to make something plain. She'd known about Evelyn from the beginning, had discovered Langston's cover-up years ago, and had done nothing. At first, out of loyalty, later out of shame, and then she'd helped. I helped Nina find her daughter, she wrote. I helped her discover the trust, but I did not authorize the knives. That was Evelyn. Her idea. A message without words. I warned her it would create havoc. She said havoc was overdue. She was right, Wolfe said, as if reciting from scripture. The family needed a reckoning, and reckoning does not arrive politely. What happens to her now? I asked. Evelyn, she inherits nothing, officially, but Miranda will ensure the injustice is corrected, at least financially. Morally, that's another ledger entirely. I considered that. Do you think Evelyn's happy now? Wolfe scoffed. Don't be absurd. This wasn't about happiness, it was about acknowledgement. That has been delivered. He tapped the edge of the letter again. She forced them to look, he said. That was her victory. We sat in silence for a minute. The kind of silence that in Wolfe's office always meant a lesson was loading. He looked at me. Would you have done the same? For whom? For Evelyn. Would you have waged such a campaign? I thought about it. I don't go in for cryptic utensils, but I might have knocked on the door. She tried that, it didn't open. No, I said, but the safe did. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, because nothing remains locked when someone needs to be seen. That afternoon, Saul dropped by for a final debrief. He looked like he'd aged a few years chasing that family around the city. Still sharp as ever, but quieter. He handed Wolfe a file, background on Nina's years abroad, Evelyn's return to the States, the sequence of her reach-out attempts. Wolfe read it, said nothing, then sealed the file and locked it in the cabinet. Will you tell Miranda? Saul asked. No, Wolfe replied. She already knows more than she will ever admit. She'll keep in touch with Evelyn? I expect so. And Daniel? Will remain aggrieved, Wolfe said, but within the range of reason, especially when he realizes that rage is harder to maintain when you're not the protagonist. That sounded about right, when Saul left. Wolfe surprised me by rising and heading toward the plant rooms. He needed to be alone with the orchids, not to think, he was done thinking, but to return to a space that didn't carry the smell of broken families and deliberate messages. Carved into harmless things, I let him go. The brownstone breathed again. The air settled. Fritz served lamb chops that evening, and Wolfe didn't say a word through the entire meal, which was his way of expressing satisfaction. After dinner, I went to the office and opened my notes. I didn't plan to write a full report. Wolfe rarely shared internal cases unless they required legal disclosure, but I felt compelled to finish the shape of it. Maybe to explain something to myself. Here's what I wrote. Case summary. The butter knife confession client, Miranda Dalrymple, initial. Initiation. Discovery of symbolic object in safe anonymous note. Crime. None in legal sense. Emotional fraud. Identity suppression suspects. Miranda Dalrymple, Daniel Dalrymple, Elena Priest, Calvin Mercer, Henry Brodick. Responsible party, Evelyn Priest. With strategic input from Elena Priest and Nina Thorne. Motive, recognition, correction of erasure. Exposure of familial omission. Method, symbolic disturbance, psychological agitation, structured unveiling of secrets. Resolution, family acknowledgement of concealed heir, no criminal action pursued, estate remains legally uncontested, socially. Reshaped comment. Case underscores non-violent yet destabilizing power of indirect accusation. Wolfe considers this case emblematic of the modern weaponization of memory. I closed the notebook. The orchids were probably still getting their lecture on the dangers of metaphors. Fritz had retired to the kitchen. Wolfe would return soon, settle back into his chair and pretend he hadn't been as moved by this one as I knew he was. He'd never admit it, but it wasn't the knives that had disturbed him. It was the principle that someone had broken into, a legacy not to steal but to be included, Not to rob, but to declare I exist, and that changes everything. At 8:10, Wolfe returned to the office. He didn't sit right away. He studied the room as if something had shifted in its foundation. I waited. Then he spoke. "Archie, do you know the most dangerous thing about families?" "I can guess," I said. "The holidays." He ignored me. "They are never finished," he said. "Not in death, not in distance. Even estrangement is a form of continuation. This case proves it." "So, what do we do?" "We remember that not all crimes are punishable," he said, "and not all truths are liberating. But some must be told anyway." He sat down heavily, reached for his beer, took a long final sip. Then he added softly, "Even if the only proof is a butter knife." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence do what it always did best around Wolfe. Settle, not vanish. Linger, like a reminder that words had consequences, but so did absence. The case was closed, but the story, that one would stay open. The following week brought rain, a slow, persistent drizzle that clung to the windows of the brownstone like a dog that wouldn't go home. Inside, life returned to its deliberate order. Breakfast precisely at 9, orchids misted at 11, arguments with fruit vendors at 1, and me, Archie Goodwin, left to monitor the outside world and keep the chaos from dripping in through the cracks. We hadn't spoken much of the Dalrymple affair since Wolfe had offered his closing rumination. That was typical. Once a case settled, Wolfe sealed it away mentally the same way he did in the filing cabinet. No need to revisit unless prompted by an outside force or a bottle of particularly nostalgic Burgundy. Still, something lingered. Not guilt, not Wolfe's brand anyway, but a sense that what had unfolded wasn't over, just moved to another stage, and that's exactly what knocked on our door the following Thursday afternoon. Fritz appeared in the office doorway, mouth drawn tight in that polite but unmistakable way that meant he was tolerating someone's presence, but only because the law required it. "A young woman," he said. "She insists on speaking with Mr. Wolfe." "Name?" I asked. "She declined to give it." "Let me guess," I said, already standing. "Dark hair, mid-20s, smarter than she thinks she needs to be?" Fritz gave a resigned nod. I glanced at Wolfe, who hadn't flinched. "Shall I tell her the consultation window closed with the last butter knife?" "No," Wolfe said, voice low. "Let her in." I raised an eyebrow, but went. She stood in the hallway, drenched from the rain, but with her coat buttoned tight, and her posture tighter. Evelyn Priest looked like someone trying not to cry in a place where crying would be expensive. Her gaze flicked over the walls as I led her to the office, measured, cautious, observant. She wasn't afraid, but she wasn't confident either. She sat without being asked, which Wolfe would normally hate, but he said nothing. Just regarded her like a zoologist with a newly unearthed species. "I expected Miranda," he said, "or Daniel." "They're not ready," she said. "I am." Wolfe folded his hands. "To do what?" "To apologize," she said. "Now that was unexpected." Wolfe blinked. Not slowly, not dramatically, just once precisely. "For the knives?" he asked. "No," she said. "For using people to get answers I could have asked for directly. I wanted to be noticed, but I was also angry. I thought, if I made them feel what I felt, they'd understand. And do they?" Evelyn hesitated. "Miranda does. She's trying. She's different than I thought." "Most people are," Wolfe said. "I thought she was cold, calculated, but she's—" Evelyn trailed off. "She cried when she saw me." "She is pragmatic," Wolfe said, "but not cruel. That is a dangerous combination for anyone trying to paint her as a villain. I know that now." She turned to me then as if she'd sensed I was the softer target. "I never meant to hurt anyone." I gave her a shrug. "Hurt comes with the territory when you start mailing sharpened metaphors." She smiled faintly. I wanted to be remembered. Wolfe finally leaned forward just slightly. That was as close as he got to intimacy. You were never forgotten, he said. You were omitted. That is far more dangerous. She absorbed that. I'm going back to school, she said. I deferred a year, but I think it's time. Where? Chicago. Literature. You'd hate it. Likely, Wolfe agreed. She pulled a folded slip of paper from her coat pocket. My mother asked me to give you this. He took it without touching her fingers. It was a check, a modest sum, but large enough to suggest gratitude with intent. Wolfe barely glanced at it. I do not accept payment from those I did not serve. I told her you'd say that, Evelyn said. She rose. I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For seeing what no one else would admit. Wolfe didn't reply. He didn't need to. She understood. She left. We stood in silence a while after the door closed behind her. She's going to be okay, I said. No, Wolfe said, but she will become okay. That is a different, more painful path, and it takes longer. But it is hers now. I sat down. Do you ever think about your own past? He frowned. Phooey, I am beset by the present. The past is archival. But we store it, like everything else. Of course, he said. But archives are accessed only when necessary. He gestured vaguely toward the door, had no key, so she broke in. That worked out well for her. Yes, Wolfe admitted. But it also broke things that may never fully heal. I considered that. You sound unusually reflective. Bah. I detest melodrama. I am simply observant. Fritz brought in tea. Wolfe rejected it with a wave and asked for a beer instead. Bring. The yellow ale, he said. This case leaves a taste in the mouth. Fritz disappeared. I leaned back. You ever going to tell me what tipped you off? I asked. To Evelyn? No. To the whole thing. The why behind the knife. The real meaning. Wolfe smirked. The dullness, he said. I blinked. The dullness of the knife, he clarified. It was not sharp, not used. It had not done anything. And yet it carried weight. That made it a symbol. And symbols come from intellect, not impulse. This was never an act of rage. It was a gesture of rhetoric. You read a butter knife, like a poem. It was a poem, Wolfe said. A clumsy one, but heartfelt. He took the beer Fritz handed him, sipped once and sighed. Let this be the last case involving tableware, he muttered. No promises, I said. People keep finding new ways to confess. Then we must find new ways to listen. I nodded. Outside, the rain kept falling. Steady, persistent. Washing things clean that didn't want to be clean. Soaking through history one roof at a time. Inside, we sat in the stillness of something concluded, but not forgotten. Like a memory. Like a family. Like the edge of something that wasn't sharp, but had cut all the same. The day after Evelyn Priest visited the brownstone, life resumed its old rhythm. At least on the surface. Wolfe returned to his chair. Fritz returned to his kitchen. I returned to my desk. But something in the walls had shifted. A slight reverberation left over from the voices that had passed through, the truths that had been dragged out, whether invited or not. There had been no new cases, no unexpected phone calls, no late-night visitors carrying cryptic clues disguised as silverware. Wolfe liked it that way, and frankly, so did I. Peace may not pay the bills, but it sure is easy on the nerves. Still, even in peace, Wolfe was brooding. He hadn't filed the Dalrymple case away yet. The report was written, the notes indexed, but the manila folder still sat in the center drawer of his desk, like a splinter that hadn't quite worked itself out. And if Wolfe hadn't reached for the dictionary that week, hadn't delivered a lecture on herpetology during lunch, or made a single complaint about the inferiority of American tarragon, then I knew. He was still thinking about her. Evelyn. About The girl who had used symbols to disturb the air around an old man's fortune. About the daughter whose name had never been printed until she carved it with invisible ink. It took until Friday afternoon for Wolfe to break the silence. He set his beer down with a clink and said, "There is something I did not say." "To me?" I asked. "To her," he corrected. "To Evelyn." "You want me to track her down again? I thought you were finished talking." "I was, but something remains." I waited. She came here believing herself unworthy, and left convinced she belonged. That is a powerful transformation, Archie. I'd say you had a hand in that. No, I merely exposed the illusion, but it was her mother and Miranda who gave her a name again. He leaned back, tapping his fingers together. "We speak often of justice," he said, "but rarely of restoration." Restoration? Yes, it is easy to punish, harder to heal. I was surprised. Not by the sentiment, but by Wolfe putting it into words. The man operated more often in pronouncements than confessions. "You think she'll be okay?" "She will survive," he said, "which is not the same as healing, but it is the first step." He rose and walked to the globe, spun it once, not looking at it. "I wonder," he murmured, "how many stories go untold because the people inside them never sharpen their tools. Are you talking about knives again?" "No," he said, "but you are." I let that sit. Later that evening I answered a call from Calvin Mercer. It was brief, formal and precise. He'd delivered documents to Miranda, updated the estate filings, and confirmed that a private trust had been redirected to include Evelyn. No litigation, no scandal, just quiet, efficient correction. "Doesn't want publicity," he said. "Just to be known." "That's more than most people ask," I told him, "or more than they get," he replied, and hung up. I passed the information to Wolfe, who nodded but said nothing. It wasn't new. It was simply just. He was done with the case, but I wasn't. Not quite. So the next morning I did something Wolfe would have called unnecessary, and I'd call unfinished business. I took a cab to a small cafe off West 88th, where Evelyn had said she liked to read. I didn't bring a case file, just a book. I found her at the corner table, bent over a battered paperback, coffee going cold beside her. She saw me and smiled, and I sat down across from her. "You're not working," she said. "Nope." "Then why are you here?" "Because Wolfe doesn't say goodbye." She blinked. "Is this goodbye?" "No, it's something else. Wolfe would call it a postscript." She nodded, understanding that more than she should have. I came to say, "I said that what you did, while reckless, dramatic, and very nearly unforgivable, also worked. You didn't get justice in a courtroom. You got it in a living room, where it hurts more," she said softly. I shrugged. "Or heals more, depending." She stirred her coffee. "Miranda's been kind. She's trying. She'll keep trying," I said. "That's who she is. You'll figure each other out." "I'm not sure what I want from her." "That's fine. You already got what you needed." I reached into my coat and handed her something Wolfe had given me that morning, without explanation, just a curt instruction to see that it is received. It was a small envelope. Inside, a single card with Wolfe's distinctive, deliberate handwriting. "Acknowledgement is not charity. You earned it. Do not mistake silence for erasure. You are not forgotten." N.W. Evelyn read it, folded it, and pressed it into her coat pocket like a keepsake. "He is dramatic," she said. "Not by half," I replied. I left her then. No promises, no farewells, just the sound of the door chime as I stepped back into the city. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room. Fritz was seasoning veal. I typed up a brief note for the file and labeled it Final. Wolfe wouldn't reopen it, but I knew he'd remember it. As I was about to shelve it, I paused. Something Wolfe had said about archives. I opened the drawer labeled Closed Cases, pulled out the thick manila folder marked Dalrymple, knife case and wrote one more line at the bottom of the final page. Some families keep knives in drawers, others pass them down. But the sharpest ones are stories, and they never stay buried for long. I put it back. Wolfe returned a little before dinner, dusted orchid pollen from his sleeve, and sat down at his desk. I asked, "Would you take another case like that?" He glanced at me. "I did not take this one," he said. "It came to us, like indigestion. You're not denying you cared." "Cared?" Wolfe arched a brow. "Don't be vulgar. I solved it." "Sure," I said, "but not for a fee." He lifted his beer. "Not all debts are paid in money, Archie." "Then how was this one paid?" Wolfe took a sip. "With clarity." "That stopped me. You like clarity more than money." "I like both," Wolfe said, "but clarity has the better taste, particularly when served without a knife." I smiled. "You know," I said, "you never gave a final comment on this one. Not a real one." He looked at me, then turned his gaze to the window, where the last light of day caught on the glass. Then finally he spoke. "The most painful truths are those whispered by the people we were never allowed to know. They wait, quietly, patiently, until we hear them. And when we do, they are never knives, they are mirrors. I didn't write that down, I didn't need to. Some truths, like some people, stay with you, whether you file them away or not. It was 2 weeks after Evelyn Priest last walked through the brownstone door, and the case, if Wolfe would even call it that, had become part of the furniture. Not forgotten, just absorbed. Like the scent of Fritz's garlic chicken, or the faint grooves in Wolfe's leather chair, it had taken up residence in our lives the way only certain kinds of trouble can. The trouble that doesn't explode but lingers, quietly rearranging what you thought you knew. Wolfe hadn't spoken her name again. But that didn't mean she'd left his mind. He still glanced at the case folder now and then. He still scowled when butter was served. And he still referred to Miranda Dalrymple as the elder sibling, which in Wolfe-speak was his version of forgiveness without affection. Then, on a grey Thursday that made the whole city smell like newsprint and lost umbrellas, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Blue ink. No return address. I opened it in the office. Wolfe was seated, half listening to a Bach partita on the radio, half scowling at a bruised apple Fritz had mistakenly included in the lunch tray. "From Evelyn," I said. He looked up. Just once. Then held out a hand. The note was brief, unpolished, honest. "Mr. Wolfe, I've started writing. Not just letters, not just journals, real writing. About people, about legacy, about absence. Maybe it's not good yet, but it's mine. That's new. I don't know if I was right to stir up what I did, but I don't regret it. Thank you for treating my chaos like something worth understanding." Yours, Evelyn Priest. Wolfe read it twice, then folded it and tucked it into a book on the shelf behind him. One of those volumes no one ever borrows. A quiet place. A safe, I presume, he said. "You will want to write a closing report." "I already did," I said. He nodded. Then, surprising me, leaned back and closed his eyes. Not in exhaustion, but in the manner of a man giving something permission to leave. His mind, "I do not like sentiment," he said. "It clouds deduction." "Sure," I said, "but it's a hell of a solvent for secrets," he grunted. "Pfui." I returned to my desk. The truth is, Wolfe had won. Not with threats, not with force, and certainly not with sympathy. He'd won with pattern recognition, with tone analysis, with the calm brutality of listening better than anyone else in the room. Evelyn had forced a reckoning. Miranda had embraced it. Daniel had accepted it, grudgingly but openly. The will stood. The trust was expanded. The knives, symbolic or otherwise, had been put away. And Wolfe had returned to his orchids, his books, and his beer. But something told me that every time he buttered toast now, he'd think just a little harder before lifting the knife. Not because he was sentimental, but because he knew, better than anyone, that even the dullest blade can cut when wielded by the right hand. And sometimes the cleanest slice is the one that finally tells the truth.